You know, at 67 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life had to throw at me. 2 tours in Vietnam, a failed first marriage, bankruptcy in my 40s, and then building myself back up from nothing. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened after Margaret died. Let me back up. My name is Robert Chun, though everyone calls me Rob. I met Margaret 4 years before she passed, at a community garden of all places. I was 63, she was 61, and we were both trying to grow tomatoes that actually tasted like something. She made a joke about my sad-looking plants. I fired back about her overzealous use of fertilizer, and somehow that turned into coffee, then dinner, and the rest of our lives. Margaret was a force of nature. She'd built a successful catering business from scratch after her divorce 20 years prior to Chun's elegant events, ironically keeping her ex-husband's last name for business purposes. She had 2 daughters from that marriage, Patricia, 38, and Carolyn, 35. Both had worked in the business since college, Patricia handling operations and Caroline managing sales and client relations. I should tell you up front my relationship with those girls was never warm. Girls. I still called them that, though they were grown women with families of their own. Patricia had 3 kids and a husband who worked in finance. Caroline had twin boys and was divorced. And from day one, they made it clear I was an interloper. "Mom, you barely know him," Patricia said at our engagement dinner, not even trying to keep her voice down. 4 months, really? He could be after your money," Caroline added, swirling her wine glass like she was in some dramatic movie scene. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm 61 years old, not 16. I think I can decide who I want to spend my life with. And for your information, Rob has his own money. He sold his engineering firm 3 years ago." That was true, though I'd never told Margaret exactly how much I'd gotten for Chun Engineering Solutions. It was comfortable enough to retire on, travel, enjoy life. Nothing extravagant, but I wasn't looking for a meal ticket, and I certainly didn't need Margaret's money. We got married in a small ceremony. Margaret's daughters attended, but didn't participate. They sat in the back row, whispering to each other throughout the entire service. Their children, Margaret's grandchildren, were more excited than their mothers were, especially little Emma, Patricia's youngest, who insisted on being the flower girl. Those 4 years with Margaret were the happiest of my life. We traveled to Italy, took cooking classes together, volunteered at the local food bank. She'd wake up early to make me Vietnamese coffee the way my mother used to, even though it took forever. I'd surprise her with flowers from the garden we'd finally mastered together. We'd laugh at stupid TV shows and have deep conversations about life, loss, and everything in between. The business remained Margaret's domain, though I helped with the accounting sometimes. I had a background in systems and efficiency from my engineering days, and I could see the company had some organizational issues. But I never pushed. Patricia and Caroline were protective of their business, even though Margaret owned it outright, and they were employees, well-paid employees with profit sharing, but employees nonetheless. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor gave her 6 months to a year. She made it 11 months. In that time, I watched the woman I loved waste away to nothing. I held her hand through chemotherapy, cleaned up when she was too sick to make it to the bathroom, stayed up all night when the pain was too much. Patricia and Carolyn visited, of course, but they had their own families, their own lives. It was me, day in and day out, watching helplessly as cancer devoured her from the inside out. "Rob," she said to me one night, about 2 months before she died. We were lying in bed, her body so frail I was afraid to hold her too tight. "I need to talk to you about something." "Anything, sweetheart." "The girls. They're going to give you trouble after I'm gone." I tried to protest, but she squeezed my hand with what little strength she had. Don't. I know my daughters. I love them, but I know them. Patricia has her father's sense of entitlement, and Caroline has always been afraid of not having enough, even when there's plenty. They're going to think everything should go to them. Margaret, I don't care about the money or the business or... I know you don't. That's why I... She paused, coughing. I held a glass of water to her lips. That's why I've made arrangements. Promise me something? Anything. When the time comes, trust the process. Trust me, even if it doesn't make sense. I promised, not understanding what she meant. We had both made wills, sure. She'd shown me hers. I was to inherit the house we'd shared. She'd left substantial trusts for her grandchildren's education, and the business would be split among various beneficiaries. It all seemed straightforward. The last 3 weeks were in hospice. Patricia and Carolyn were there more often toward the end, which I was grateful for. Whatever our differences, they loved their mother, and she deserved to have all of us there. Little Emma, who was 7 by then, made her grandma a bracelet of rainbow beads. Margaret wore it until the very end. She died on a Tuesday morning in September, with me holding one hand and Patricia holding the other. Caroline was in the room, along with Patricia's husband, David. It was peaceful, if death can ever be called that. One moment she was breathing, struggling but breathing, and then she just stopped. The absence of sound was deafening. I won't dwell on the funeral. If you've been to one, you've been to them all. Lots of people saying what a wonderful person Margaret was, which was true. The catering business sent what must have been $5,000 worth of flowers. Patricia gave a beautiful eulogy. I couldn't speak. I knew I'd break down, so I stayed silent. The first 3 days after the funeral were a blur of casseroles from neighbors, and me just trying to remember to breathe. The house felt enormous and empty without Margaret in it. I found myself making 2 cups of coffee in the morning, forgetting. I'd turned to tell her something, and she wouldn't be there. On the 4th day, Patricia and Caroline came to the house. Together. That should have been my first warning sign. They barely tolerated each other most of the time, but here they were, a united front. Rob, we need to talk, Patricia said. She was wearing a black business suit, like she'd just come from a board meeting. Caroline was similarly dressed. They meant business. Of course, come in. I led them to the living room, the same room where Margaret and I had watched countless movies, where we decorated the Christmas tree last year, even though she could barely stand. They sat on the couch together. I took the armchair Margaret's chair, though I'd been sitting in it more since she'd needed the hospital bed set up downstairs. We've been going through Mom's affairs, Carolyn started. With the lawyers, the accountants. Okay, I said. I had been copied on most of the financial and legal emails, but I'll admit I hadn't read them carefully. I was grieving. Paperwork was the last thing on my mind. The business is in a complicated situation, Patricia continued. There are debts, obligations. The commercial kitchen lease is up for renewal at a higher rate. We have 3 weddings booked for next month, and we're short-staffed. I'm sorry to hear that. Can I help somehow? I could. What would help? Carolyn interrupted, her voice sharp, as if we could restructure everything cleanly, without complications. I must have looked confused because Patricia jumped in, her tone slightly softer, but no less serious. Rob, you and Mom were only married 4 years. You were married to our dad for 22 years. Caroline and I have worked in that business since we were in college. We've given our entire adult lives to it. I understand that, and I respect that. Margaret always talked about how hard you both worked. Then you'll understand, Caroline said, leaning forward, why we need you to sign over your inheritance. The house, your share of the business, everything. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Excuse me?" "It's the fair thing to do," Patricia said, pulling out a folder from her bag. "We've had our lawyers draw up papers. You sign over the house, which was the house we grew up in, by the way, and your portion of the business assets. In return, we'll give you $100,000. That's more than fair for 4 years of marriage." "Fair?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Your mother just died." "Which is why we're being generous," Carolyn snapped. "Legally, we could make this very difficult for you. Contest the will on the grounds of undue influence. You were her caretaker. You had access to her in her most vulnerable state. We could argue she wasn't of sound mind when she updated her will after marrying you. She was completely sound of mind. You know that, do we?" Patricia raised an eyebrow. She was on a lot of medications. Pain management drugs. Who knows what state she was really in? I stood up. "I think you should leave." "Rob," Caroline's voice took on a pleading tone. "Be reasonable. What are you going to do with a catering business? You're an engineer. You don't know anything about food service, vendors, client relations. And this house, it's too big for one person. It needs work." "The roof needs replacing. The foundation has issues Mom kept putting off. You'd be drowning in expenses." "Then that's my problem to deal with." "It doesn't have to be," Patricia said, standing as well. She placed the folder on the coffee table. "Look over the papers. We're giving you a week to think about it. But Rob, understand this, we will fight for what's ours. We will drag this through court for years if we have to. We have the resources. We have 3 law firms on retainer through the business. Do you really want to spend your retirement in legal battles?" They left. I stood in that living room for what felt like hours, staring at the folder on the coffee table like it was a poisonous snake. That night, I called my lawyer, Richard Morrison. I'd used him for years, trusted him completely. He'd handled my business sale, my divorce from my first wife, my estate planning. "Rob," he said after I explained the situation, "I'm going to be blunt. Fight this. Fight it with everything you've got. Richard, I don't want Margaret's money. I never did. This isn't about money. It's about respect. Margaret made her wishes clear in a legally binding document. She was evaluated by 2 separate physicians as being of sound mind when she updated her will. I know I was there. She knew exactly what she was doing. What did she do, exactly? I know I inherit the house and some business assets, but, Rob, have you actually read the will in detail?" I admitted I hadn't. It had seemed too painful, too final. "Read it," Richard said. "Tonight. Every word. Then call me tomorrow. Because if you don't fight this, you're not just disrespecting yourself. You're disrespecting Margaret's final wishes. And from what you've told me about her, she was not a woman whose wishes should be ignored." After we hung up, I poured myself a Scotch Margaret's favorite, Glenfiddich 18, and opened my laptop. I found the will in my email. The subject line from Richard's office read, "Final Will and Testament, Margaret Lynn Chun." I started reading. The house would go to me, as I'd understood. There were trusts set up for the grandchildren, $50,000 each for education, accessible when they turned 18. That was new. I hadn't known about that provision. Margaret had set it up without telling me. Then came the business assets. This is where it got complicated. Chun's Elegant Events was valued at approximately $2.3 million. Margaret owned it outright, 100% of shares. The will stipulated the following: 20% to Patricia Chun Morrison, 20% to Carolyn Chun Bradford, 60% to Robert Chun, but there was more. Much more. The will specified that the business could not be sold or dissolved for a period of 5 years without unanimous agreement of all shareholders. During that time, operational decisions would require approval from shareholders holding at least 51% of shares, meaning I would have final say. However, and this was the crucial part, if Patricia and Caroline chose to continue working in the business, they would maintain their current salaries and profit-sharing arrangements at a rate of 15% of net profits each, in addition to their shareholding distributions. But if they chose to leave the business or were terminated for cause, they would forfeit their shares, which would then be distributed to the remaining shareholders. There was a separate clause about the house. If I chose to sell it within 10 years, I would be required to offer Patricia and Caroline the option to purchase it at market value first. But attached to the deed was something called a life estate that I didn't fully understand. And then, at the very end, was a separate document. A letter from Margaret to me. My dearest Rob, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I suspect my daughters are making your life difficult. I'm sorry for that. I raised them to be strong, but somewhere along the way, Patricia learned to be entitled, and Caroline learned to be afraid. That's partly my fault. I'm giving you controlling interest in the business, not because I don't trust my daughters, but because I know they'll need someone to keep them honest with each other. They've been fighting over this company since they started working together. You're the only person I trust to be fair to both of them while keeping the business running. The house has a secret, my love. Under our bedroom, the master bedroom, there's a hidden safe. We had it installed the month before my diagnosis, remember? You thought I was being paranoid about our important documents. The combination is Emma's birthday, July 15th, 16. In that safe, you'll find 1. A detailed accounting ledger. 2. Documentation of certain business transactions. 3. A second letter that explains everything. Trust the process, my darling. Trust me, and whatever happens, know that you gave me the happiest 4 years of my life. I love you beyond measure. Forever yours, Margaret. My hands were shaking. I read the letter 3 times, trying to process what it meant. A hidden safe? Documentation? What had Margaret been keeping from everyone? I looked at the clock. It was past midnight. But I couldn't wait. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, though I'd been sleeping in the guest room since Margaret went into hospice. Being in our room without her was too painful. I pushed aside the heavy wooden bed frame. It took some effort at my age, but adrenaline gave me strength. Underneath, set into the concrete foundation, was indeed a safe. I'd completely forgotten about it. When Margaret had insisted on installing it, I'd thought it was overkill, but she'd been insistent. You never know what might happen, she'd said. I want our important things protected. I entered Emma's birthday on the keypad. The safe clicked open. Inside was exactly what Margaret had described. A leather-bound ledger, a manila envelope stuffed with documents, and another sealed envelope with my name on it. I took everything downstairs, poured another scotch, and started with the ledger. What I found made my blood run cold. Margaret had been keeping 2 sets of books, not for the IRS. Everything was legal and accounted for there. But for herself, the ledger documented years of financial discrepancies in the business. Small at first, but growing larger over time. 3 years before Margaret and I met, someone had started siphoning money from the company. It started with tiny amounts, $500 here, $300 there. Petty cash discrepancies, labeled as operational expenses. But over time, it escalated. Vendor payments that were higher than the actual invoices. Bonuses paid to non-existent employees. Equipment purchases that never materialized. Over 6 years, approximately $340,000 had been stolen from Chun's elegant events. And according to Margaret's meticulous notes, cross-referenced with credit card statements and bank records in the manila envelope, The thief was Caroline. My stepdaughter had been embezzling from her own mother's business. The documentation was damning. Caroline had been living well beyond her means. Her divorce had been expensive. Her ex-husband had gotten custody of their twins, and she'd been paying through the nose in child support. She'd developed a gambling problem. Margaret had copies of statements from 3 different online gambling sites. She'd racked up credit card debt exceeding $200,000, and she'd been stealing to cover it all up. But here's what made me sick to my stomach. Patricia knew. There was an email chain in the envelope, printed out. Caroline had confessed to Patricia 2 years ago, begging her sister not to tell their mother. Patricia had agreed, but only if Caroline paid her $50,000 to keep quiet. Blackmail. Patricia was blackmailing her own sister. Margaret had discovered it all about 8 months before her diagnosis. The letter explained everything. Rob, the second letter began, and I could hear her voice in my head as I read it. I discovered Caroline's theft by accident. A vendor called me directly about a payment discrepancy, and when I started digging, it all unraveled. I confronted her. She broke down, told me everything: the divorce, the gambling, the debt. I wanted to help her, but she lied to me. She promised she'd stopped, promised she'd get help, but she didn't. She kept stealing, even knowing I was onto her. Then I found out about Patricia's involvement. My own daughters conspiring against me. It broke my heart in a way I can't describe. I didn't confront them. I know you'll think I should have, but Rob, I was diagnosed with cancer 2 weeks after I found out about Patricia's blackmail. Suddenly, I had to prioritize. I was dying. I could spend my final months in angry confrontation with my daughters, or I could spend them loving you and preparing for what came after. I chose you. I chose peace for as long as I could have it. But I couldn't let them get away with it either. That's why the will is structured the way it is. The business needs someone honest at the helm. That's you. The money isn't yours, not really. But the responsibility is. Here's what I need you to do. Give them a chance. One chance. If they come to you with honesty, with genuine remorse, ready to make things right, forgive them. Help them restructure the business. Let them buy you out fairly over time, and walk away knowing you honored their mother's memory by showing them grace. But if they come to you with threats, with demands, trying to take what isn't theirs, and disrespect what we had together, then show them what they've really inherited. Show them the ledger. Show them the documentation. Let them know that their mother knew everything, and she still gave you control because she knew you'd do what was right. The choice is theirs. They can have a fresh start with honesty, or they can have the truth of what they've done. I love you, my darling. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden. But I know your character. I know you'll do what's right. I sat in the dark living room until the sun came up, that letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Not for myself, but for Margaret, dying of cancer while knowing her daughters had betrayed her, spending her final months pretending everything was fine so she could have peace with the man she loved. The next morning, I called Richard. I read the will, I said, and I found something else. I told him everything. He was silent for a long moment. Rob, this changes everything. With this documentation, Patricia and Caroline don't have a leg to stand on. If they try to contest the will, you can not only defend it, you can file charges against Caroline for embezzlement and Patricia for extortion. You could destroy them. I know. So what do you want to do? I thought about Margaret, about her kindness, her grace, even in the face of betrayal. I thought about how she'd asked me to give them a chance. Set up a meeting, I said. All of us. Their lawyers, my lawyer, everyone. Tell them I'm ready to discuss the estate. Are you going to show them what you found? Not yet, I said. Let's see if they choose honesty or threats. The week passed slowly. Patricia called twice, then Carolyn. I didn't answer. I let Richard handle all communication. He scheduled the meeting for the following Monday at his office neutral ground. I spent that week thinking about Margaret, about her daughters, about what the right thing to do was. I wasn't angry at Patricia and Carolyn, not really. I was sad. Sad that they'd betrayed their mother. Sad that grief and greed were about to destroy what was left of this family. Sad that Margaret's final months had been poisoned by this knowledge. On Sunday night, I almost called them. Almost reached out to say, let's just talk like family. But I remembered Margaret's words, give them a chance. They'd already had their chance that day in the living room. They'd chosen threats over honesty. They'd chosen to dishonor their mother's final wishes rather than respect them. Monday morning, I put on my best suit, the one I'd worn to my wedding to Margaret. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. I'd aged a decade in the past year, but my eyes were clear. I knew what I had to do. Richard had prepared everything. In his briefcase was the will, the ledger, the documentation, and Margaret's letters. We'd agreed on the strategy. Let them make their play first. Give them every opportunity to do the right thing. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. I was ready. Richard's conference room was smaller than I expected. A large mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. Patricia and Carolyn were already there when I arrived, flanked by two lawyers I didn't recognize. They'd brought their husbands too, David and Caroline's ex, Marcus, who apparently had been brought in for moral support despite their divorce. Rob, Patricia said coolly. She didn't stand. Neither did Carolyn. I nodded and took my seat across from them. Richard sat beside me, placing his briefcase on the table with a deliberate thud. Thank you all for coming, Richard began. We're here to discuss the estate of Margaret Lynn Chun, and let's skip the formalities. Caroline's lawyer interrupted. He was young, probably early 30s, with slicked back hair and an expensive suit. My clients have made their position clear. Mr. Chun was married to the deceased for only 4 years. The bulk of the estate, particularly the family business and childhood home, should rightfully pass to Mrs. Chun's biological children. The will is clear, Richard said calmly. Mrs. Chun was of sound mind, evaluated by 2 independent physicians, and we're prepared to challenge that, Patricia's lawyer chimed in. She was older, sharp-eyed. We have testimony from family members about Mrs. Chun's diminished capacity during her illness. The pain medications alone. Are you seriously going to drag your mother's name through the mud? I couldn't help myself. She made her wishes clear. Why can't you respect that? Patricia's eyes flashed. You manipulated a dying woman. You saw an opportunity, and you took it. 4 years, Rob. You were married for 4 years, and you think you deserve everything she spent a lifetime building? I don't want anything, I said quietly. I never did. Then sign the papers, Carolyn snapped. She pushed a folder across the table. We've revised our offer. $200,000. You sign over the house, your shares in the business, everything. Walk away, start fresh. I looked at the folder, then at Richard. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod. All right, I said. The room went silent. What? Patricia blinked. I'll sign. Give me the papers. Caroline's lawyer scrambled to open the folder, pulling out documents. Richard put a hand on my arm, playing his part perfectly. Rob, I strongly advise against. I'm not fighting them, Richard. Margaret wouldn't have wanted this family torn apart over money. I looked at Patricia and Carolyn. You're right. It was only 4 years. You're her daughters. You should have what was hers. I could see the confusion on their faces, quickly replaced by triumph. Carolyn smiled. Patricia sat back, satisfied. "You're making the right choice," Patricia's lawyer said, though she seemed suspicious of how easy this was. I took the pen Caroline's lawyer offered. I signed the first page, then the second. Page after page, transferring the house, the business shares, everything. Richard sat beside me, stone-faced, saying nothing. When I finished, I slid the documents back across the table. "There," I said. "It's done. The house is yours. The business is yours. Everything." Caroline was beaming. Patricia looked relieved. Their lawyers started gathering the papers, preparing to notarize them. "Although," Richard said casually, pulling a document from his briefcase, "there is one small matter we should address before notarization." "What matter?" Patricia's lawyer asked. "The life estate clause attached to the house. It's fairly standard, but the new owners should be aware of it." "Life estate?" Caroline frowned. "Yes, Mrs. Chun placed a life estate on the property in her will. It means that while Mr. Chun signed over ownership, he retains the right to live in the house, rent-free, with all utilities and maintenance paid by the owners, until his death. He cannot be evicted or forced to leave under any circumstances. The property cannot be sold while he's alive without his written consent." Patricia's face went pale. "What?" "It's all legal," Richard continued. Mrs. Chun was very specific. She wanted to ensure that if anything happened to her, Mr. Chun would never be homeless. "So congratulations. You now own a house you cannot sell, cannot rent out, and must maintain while Mr. Chun lives there for free for the rest of his life." That can't be," Carolyn sputtered. "It's right here in the will." Richard slid a copy across the table. "Your lawyers can verify. Life estates are perfectly legal in this state." Caroline's lawyer was scanning the document, his face growing redder. "This is technically valid, but—" "And regarding the business," Richard continued, pulling out another document. "According to the transfer papers Mr. Chun just signed, Patricia and Carolyn Chun now each own 50% of Chun's Elegant Events. Equal partners." "That's what we wanted," Patricia said, though she sounded uncertain. "Of course, but there's a small complication. You see, the business currently has some financial irregularities that need to be addressed." The room went very quiet. "What irregularities?" Patricia's lawyer asked. Richard opened the leather ledger and placed it on the table. "Over the past 6 years, approximately $340,000 has been embezzled from Chun's Elegant Events. Mrs. Chun discovered this before her death and documented everything." Caroline's face went from pale to white. Patricia closed her eyes. Now, as the former majority shareholder, Mrs. Chun chose not to press charges. But now that you two are the sole owners, and as Mr. Chun is no longer involved with the business, he has a legal obligation to report these findings to the proper authorities. Unless, of course, the new owners wish to address it internally. "You can't prove anything," Caroline whispered. Richard pulled out the manila envelope. Bank statements, credit card receipts, vendor invoices, email chains. He spread them across the table like a dealer showing a winning hand. Mrs. Chun was very thorough. "There's documentation of every fraudulent transaction, including the online gambling accounts, the fake vendor payments, the ghost employees, and—" he pulled out the email chain, evidence that Patricia Chun Morrison was aware of the theft and accepted payment to remain silent. "That's extortion," Patricia's lawyer said, but her voice had lost its edge. "Yes," Richard agreed. "It is, and embezzlement. And fraud. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on most of these transactions. If Mr. Chun takes this to the authorities, which, again, He's legally obligated to do now that he's no longer associated with the business. Both Patricia and Carolyn could face criminal charges. David, Patricia's husband, stood up abruptly. Patricia, what the hell is he talking about? Patricia couldn't look at him. Caroline was crying silently, mascara running down her face. However, Richard said, and the word hung in the air like a lifeline, Mr. Chun is willing to offer an alternative. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. I want you to listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Both women looked at me, Carolyn with desperate hope, Patricia with barely concealed anger. Your mother knew everything. She found out about the theft, about the blackmail, about all of it. It broke her heart. But do you know what she did? Instead of confronting you, instead of spending her final months in anger and recrimination, she chose to spend them loving me. She chose peace. Because that's who Margaret was. Carolyn sobbed openly now. Patricia's jaw was clenched so tight, I thought her teeth might crack. She left me controlling interest in the business, not because she didn't trust you, but because she prayed that having someone neutral involved might force you two to finally work together honestly. She hoped you'd come to me with integrity, that we could honor her memory together as a family. Rob, Patricia started, but I held up my hand. You didn't do that. You came at me with threats and lawyers, trying to take what your mother specifically wanted me to have. Not because I need it, not because I earned it, but because she wanted to teach you both one final lesson. I pulled out Margaret's letter, the one addressed to me, and placed it on the table. She wrote this knowing you'd probably do exactly what you did. And you know what? She still left instructions for me to give you a chance. One chance. I stood up, Richard following my lead. Here's my offer, and it's the only one you'll get. We tear up the papers I just signed. The will stands as Margaret wrote it. I retain my 60% of the business. You keep your 20% each. You both remain as employees at your current salaries. But Caroline, you enter a treatment program for gambling addiction. I'll pay for it. And both of you pay back what was stolen. On a payment plan will work out. No criminal charges. No destroying your lives. You get to keep your jobs, support your families, and rebuild your integrity. And what do you get? Patricia asked bitterly. I get to honor your mother's wishes. I get to help her daughters become the women she hoped you'd be. And when the 5-year period is up, if you've both worked honestly and rebuilt the business properly, I'll sell you my shares at a fair price and walk away. You'll have the company free and clear, earned through actual work, instead of threats and manipulation. I picked up Richard's briefcase. You have 24 hours to decide. Take the offer, or Richard reports everything to the district attorney tomorrow at noon. Your choice. We left them sitting there, the silence in the room absolutely deafening. That was 6 months ago. Caroline entered rehab the next day. Patricia took longer. She spent a full 23 hours arguing with David, who'd apparently had no idea about any of it. But in the end, they both accepted. The business is doing better now. I implemented some of the organizational systems I'd wanted to suggest years ago. Patricia, it turns out, is actually brilliant at operations when she's not busy covering up her sister's theft. Caroline came back from treatment focused and determined, and her sales numbers have been the best they've ever been. We're not a family, not in the traditional sense. I'm not their dad, and they're not my daughters. But we're something. We have Sunday dinners sometimes, though they're awkward. Patricia's kids are warming up to me. Emma still makes me bracelets, though now she's 8 and they're much more sophisticated. Caroline's twins visited last month and taught me how to play Fortnite, which I'm terrible at. Last week, on what would have been Margaret's 66th birthday, the 4 of us went to her grave together. We didn't say much. But Caroline placed flowers tomatoes from the garden, which made me smile. Patricia brought a bottle of Glenfiddich 18, which we poured over the headstone, probably illegally. She'd be happy we're trying, Carolyn said quietly. She'd be furious it took this long, Patricia countered, but there was a small smile on her face. I think they're both right. I still sleep in the guest room. I still make 2 cups of coffee sometimes. I still turn to tell Margaret things and find empty space. Grief doesn't disappear. You just learn to carry it. But I also have purpose now. The business needs me, at least for a few more years. Patricia and Caroline need accountability, someone to keep them honest with each other and themselves. And when my 5 years are up, when I sell them my shares and finally move on, I'll know I did what Margaret asked. I honored her wishes. I gave her daughters a chance. And I proved that love, real love, doesn't die when someone does. It transforms. It becomes action, becomes integrity, becomes the hard choice to do what's right, even when it's painful. Margaret used to say that the best catering wasn't about the fanciest food or the most elaborate presentations. It was about creating moments where people came together and remembered what mattered. She did that for us one last time, from beyond the grave. And you know what? The tomatoes in the garden are coming in beautifully this year. She'd be proud of that too. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.